I have the great honor of introducing our Secretary of State, Tobias Reed. Tobias is Oregon's 30th Secretary of State. He was born in Montana and raised in Idaho. He moved to Salem to attend Willamette University before earning his master's degree in business administration at the University of Washington. He brings a wide range of public and private sector experience to the office. He worked at the U.S. Treasury and Nike prior to his election as state representative in 2007 and as his state treasurer in 2017. As an elected official, Secretary Reed helped lead the charge to fund full-day kindergarten across Oregon, creating and later implementing the Oregon Retirement Savings Program, known as Oregon Saves, which serves more than 130,000 Oregonians and protected the Elliott State Forest, one of the largest research forests and carbon reserves in North America. As Secretary of State, his leading priorities are to hold the state of Oregon accountable for delivering on its promises, managing tax dollars wisely, and running secure, fair elections. Secretary Reed lives in Beaverton with his wife Heidi and their 2 children and dog Chatta. The Secretary of State is one of the 3 constitutional offices of the executive branch elected statewide. The Secretary is elected on a 4-year term and is limited to 2 consecutive terms during any 12-year period. As an independent constitutional officer, the Secretary of State answers directly and solely to the people of Oregon. The Secretary of State is the auditor of public accounts, chief elections officer, public records administrator, and custodian of the state seal. It's a big job. His department examines and audits accounts of all publicly funded agencies, boards, and commissions. As the administrator of public records, his office houses state government records through the Archives Division and manages all public records for detention, retention, and disposition. The Secretary of State's office also keeps public records of companies doing business in Oregon, nonprofit corporations, and trade and service marks, as well as statutory liens and warrants. The Secretary shares responsibility with the Governor and Treasurer for managing state-owned lands and chairs the Oregon Sustainability Board. His office regulates Oregon Notaries Public and publishes the Oregon Blue Book. Finally, at last, the Secretary of State interprets and applies state election laws, publishes the voters pamphlet, and supervises all election local and statewide. Let us again welcome Tobias Reed, the Secretary of State.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction. You covered a lot of things. Ordinarily, it happens that sometimes when I say I'm Secretary of State, people ask me about foreign policy, and I have to explain that while it's the same title, it's a very different job. But you covered beautifully so much of what we do. I also really appreciated the chance to see who's in the audience, particularly candidates. We're going to talk about elections particularly, but I see there are probably others, but I see 2 people that deserve a little recognition as my partners, Representative Court Boyce in the front, and I think you're going to hear from your wonderful county clerk a little bit later on as part of our Q&A, but Julie Brecky's here as well. So thanks to both of you also. I want to say I just love being in rooms like this. This doesn't really count as a room, but halls like this, because there is a lot in the world right now that is that can cause people to be distracted and discouraged. And being with passionate, energetic, committed Oregonians is a really good thing. And we're here because of you League of Women Voters members, and the League of Coos County in particular. I appreciate not just the invitation you've offered me, but the steady, patient work that's often quiet that you always do, strengthening our democracy. You are the people who show up, who ask questions, who insist on facts, and remind us that a healthy democracy is not something that just happens. It runs on informed, engaged citizens who are willing to do the work. So I really appreciate all of you always showing up. I think what unites us, among other things, is the shared belief that democracy endures only when people participate. So it's just great to be in a room filled with people who know that keeping government accountable is not a right, it's a responsibility, and a responsibility that belongs to every one of us. So it is really an honor to serve as Secretary of State in Oregon. And my North Star, the thing that I think about more than anything else, is my obligation to protect your right to vote. That is not just a civic ritual. It is how we hold government accountable. It is how we decide what our future is going to look like together. And it's how everyday people make sure that government works for them, not the other way around. That responsibility, the obligation to protect the right to vote, is something that has never been more important than it is right now. So we should talk about this moment that we're in, I think. There's been a lot in the news lately about elections, about democracy. That's really important, about who gets to vote, about how votes are counted, and about who gets to decide what those rules are. If you're a normal person, for me too, that noise can be overwhelming. A lot of it is confusing. And I have to tell you, I think a lot of that is by design. Some of it, we have to be honest, is also designed to make people cynical, to make people throw up their hands and say, why even bother? But history teaches us something really important in this regard, that democracy does not disappear overnight. It is something that erodes slowly. It erodes when people lose trust, when institutions are weakened, or when lies are repeated so often that they sound or start to sound like truth. These are the times when we have to shake off that cynicism and remind ourselves that our democracy is a living, breathing thing. It only lasts as long as we are all willing to come together and do what's necessary to keep it alive. I hope you agree with me on that. That makes me feel good too. But we can't tiptoe around this. We know that the right to vote, the freedom to vote, is under attack in this country. That is, I think it's a true statement on its face, but it came into really stark relief last summer in Oregon when the U.S. Department of Justice showed up. They came demanding a full, unredacted copy of our voter registration data. That would include things like partial social security numbers, full dates of birth, full driver's license numbers. So with no legal authority, with no transparency on how this information would be used by the federal government or secured, I had a very simple answer: not a chance. This was not a hard decision for me because we have seen how this data can be mishandled, and I am not about to gamble with your privacy. But we have to be real. This is not just about security or the integrity of our elections. Other states, both with Democratic secretaries of state and Republican secretaries of state, said no too, because they saw what we saw, that this is an irresponsible attempt to strong-arm states into handing over sensitive data that could be abused or mishandled. And by handing it over, we would be undermining or even violating the U.S. Constitution and state law. My oath is to all of you, the people of Oregon, not to the politics of Washington, D.C. So I'm not really worried about the fact that they sued us over this. And I especially want to thank the League of Women Voters for standing with us in that case as an intervener. I really do appreciate it. That's real too, because when people ask me what was the most notable thing or surprising thing about your first year as Secretary of State, I don't have to hesitate very long. I say, I did not expect to be in a federal courtroom as a defendant, but I was. And I wasn't there alone. I was there with the League of Women Voters, among others. That means a lot to me. So you probably have heard some of the updates on this case. We secured a pretty significant victory in January when a federal judge in Eugene did something unusual and ruled from the bench, dismissed the case, threw it out. That's not the end of the story, unfortunately, because the federal government has elected to appeal that decision, that judgment. But this is a really strong and important start. And I am confident in the argument we're making in this case. I believe that the federal government will not prevail, that the judges and courts will continue to uphold the Constitution and protect your right to privacy. That lawsuit is not what keeps me up at night. What I am really worried about is recent cuts to what I would describe as real election security. Just pause for a moment and recognize that I've made it this far in the speech without using an acronym. It's about to end. So I don't know if you know CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This was the agency, sadly I am using the past tense, that was responsible for protecting our elections from cyber threats and foreign interference. They gave us intelligence briefings and real-time cyber threat alerts, physical security assessments, incident response plans. They were a real firewall against those things. But and they were essential for the kinds of things that your county clerk and county clerks across the state really need. But as of last year, that's essentially all gone because of the cuts that this administration has made. And while we are working to fill in those cracks, we can't make up for all the resources that were lost. That is a real threat. And I am also deeply concerned about the so-called Save America or Save America Act. They're two different efforts that's being debated in Congress right now. If you are not following this, let me fill you in a little bit. This is a bill that would require eligible voters to produce an ID plus proof of citizenship, whether that's a passport or a birth certificate or a naturalization document, to register to vote and to actually cast their vote. That might sound simple if you think about it just quickly, but it's not when you realize that millions of Americans do not have easy access to those documents. That paperwork might be lost. It might be expensive to replace. It might be locked away someplace hundreds of miles from where they live today. On top of that, those documents have to match, which means that millions of Americans who might have changed their names, mostly married women, will have a much harder time registering to vote because they'll have to secure that new identity document. And when it comes to states like Oregon, who vote exclusively by mail, this bill also specifies that absentee ballots, or ballots, in our case, all ballots that are sent by mail, have to be accompanied by eligible photo identification. We have to figure out, do you take a photocopy of your driver's license or your passport and send that with your ballot? How are clerks going to handle that? On top of the practicality, it poses real security and privacy concerns for voters. And it means all of those practical questions. How would someone go about doing this? The result is really clear and really scary. American citizens, eligible American citizens, will be denied their legal, constitutionally guaranteed right to vote. That is not an imaginary thing, and I'm saying it is not theoretical because we've seen what happens when laws like this are passed. Kansas is a good example. More than 30,000 eligible American citizens were denied their ability to register to vote because they couldn't produce that paperwork. 30,000 people in Kansas. We do not have to make that same mistake. We do not have to waste millions of dollars of taxpayer resources to figure that out. We've also got to be clear about something else today. I think a lot of people are advancing these kinds of proposals because they think that we have to stop non-citizens from voting. But I am here to tell you there is literally no evidence that that is a real issue impacting our elections. It's not. Simply not. People can keep saying it, they can say it louder and louder, but it doesn't make it true. Non-citizen voting is already illegal and it is vanishingly rare. When it happens, it is usually the result of a clerical error that's not an intent on the voter, and it's had zero impact on the outcome of our elections. I want to put some numbers to this. The Legislative Fiscal Office in Oregon did a study of this. Took about 20 years of ballots that totaled 60.9 million ballots cast. I'm tempted to ask you to guess how many cases of unlawful voting were found in that 61 million ballot sample. We have a big audience here, so I'm not going to do it. 38. Someone knows the answer. That's not a guess. That's exactly the right answer. 38. I was at Sayusla High School earlier, and I noted that same stat to them, and I said, it's not math class, but we can all do that math. That's less than 1 in a million. That's less than the chances of being struck by lightning. We want it to be 0, of course, but 38 out of nearly 61 million is not an issue that is going to create issues in the outcomes. It is not something that should cause us to make it harder for eligible people to vote. It's not a crisis. It is not what people say it is. And we have to be serious about that, because when people can't vote, their government is less likely to do what the majority of people want. That undermines our stability, our durability, and our faith in democracy as a whole. That's something we should all be concerned about. Now, I don't have to tell anyone in this room on a Wednesday afternoon when it is beautiful outside that democracy is fragile. You're here, I suspect, because you believe that already, and because you've seen it tested over decades, over the course of this country's history. Something that too many of us, particularly politicians, forget is that democracy is not self-sustaining. It depends on participation. And that's why voting by mail is not simply a convenience, though it is that. It is also a safeguard. And Oregon, hear this from your Secretary of State, is the gold standard when it comes to running safe, accurate, and fair elections. We should be proud of that. Voting by mail makes sure that every eligible Oregonian can participate amidst busy and complicated lives, whether you're working 2 jobs in enterprise or living with limited mobility in Klamath Falls or struggling to find childcare and make rent in Portland. It removes barriers that we see too often in other places, like voter intimidation and long lines. It gives all of us as voters the time to be thoughtful, to make smart decisions, informed choices in a place where you all feel comfortable and respected. You can sit on your couch in your pajamas and make your decisions, after all. That's a nice thing. Now let's also talk about security and election integrity. I want to say 3 things, 3 simple things here that I hope you will all help me spread as a word, because they are true. Every ballot in Oregon has a paper trail. Every signature on every ballot is verified, and every vote in Oregon is secure. That too is worth repeating. The machines that we use to count ballots are never, ever connected to the internet. They are publicly tested before and after every election for accuracy. And our paper ballots, remember how we hear around the country, we need to use paper ballots. We do in Oregon, only paper ballots. I'm happy to quote one of my predecessors, Dennis Richardson. He was Secretary of State. He was Republican Secretary of State. He said it very clearly. You can't hack paper ballots. Simple statement. And if we want to talk about election security and integrity, we cannot go any further without talking about what is happening to our local elections officials. These are the heroes of democracy. When When Ms. Brecky comes up later, we'll get to applaud her, and she will deserve it. But they are dealing not with theoretical threats. They are dealing with real threats, with harassment, with burnout. They're dealing with misinformation, the kinds of lies that spread a lot faster than the truth. Social media is flooded with these kinds of things. The lies about how votes are counted and who's registered and who's eligible. These public officials are being vilified for following the law and doing their job, and we can't have it. The elections offices across Oregon, many of them have been threatened. They've had ballot boxes vandalized. We've had staff harassed online and in person, and yet they keep showing up. They keep doing the work. They keep maintaining the rolls. They keep counting the ballots. That is service. That is protection of democracy. And we will continue to thank them and recognize their commitment, their courage, and support them. So I've been talking about the threats, and I want to transition for a moment in that same environment to talk about clerks, because they are doing amazing work. One of the highlights, if being in court as a defendant was a low light, the highlight of my first year in office was the chance to visit every county clerk in their counties. Anybody in here know how many? It's someone who knew that we have 38 cases of unlawful voting out of 61 million. This person has to know exactly how many counties are in Oregon. 36. Excellent. I should not have doubted at all. It was great. This is a big state we live in, and it's wonderful. So it takes some effort to get to all 36 counties, but I did it, and that was great because I got to see these heroes in their natural environments, in their work. They're dealing with so much, but to a person, every one of them is absolutely committed. They are people who do not know the word impossible. They've got to adapt all the time, on the fly, with sometimes nothing more than duct tape and determination. And they figure it out. We've had lots of examples of that. Perhaps one of the best for me was not so many years ago when we had wildfires and a whole lot of people that were displaced. But still, the clerks figured out how to get them their ballots and make sure that their ballots counted. But these clerks need more than just our kind words here. They need resources and respect and relief. Burnout is a real thing in this tough environment. A third of Oregon's clerks have left or announced plans to leave since 2021. And I'm telling you, both as your Secretary of State and as a former state treasurer, if you want to invest in democracy with the highest possible turnout, investing in clerks is one of the best things we can possibly do. We are working with these clerks, these heroes, to build resilience in our system so elections can withstand any crisis, whether it's a natural disaster like we were just talking about, or a manufactured disaster like so many of those that are coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. But we can't do this work alone. Democracy, as I have said more times than you probably wanted to hear today, is something that depends on citizens who are willing to stand up for it. And I'm really confident that everyone in this room understands the stakes for Oregon and our country. The most powerful thing you can do to anticipate the possibility of a question is to share what you've learned today. Probably a lot of you already knew all this stuff, but we've got to make sure that everybody knows it. Your fellow Americans around the kitchen table, in the grocery store line, community meetings, any of those places is an opportunity to help bring people into full understanding of how strong and resilient our system is. Because the antidote to disinformation is education. You can remind people that our system works because you have seen it. You can remind them that participation matters because you've modeled it. And you can remind them that democracy is not something that just happens. It's a living, breathing thing. You all know this because you have lived it as voters, as members of the League of Women Voters, and as advocates who show up to hold those of us in government accountable. So when someone says my vote doesn't matter, you can tell them about a close election right here in these communities. Someone says vote by mail isn't safe, you can tell them how every ballot is tracked and every signature is verified. And when someone says democracy is broken or politics is broken, remind them that this whole system is what we make of it and that it is worth fighting for. Now, I have a couple of specific public service announcements I want to make too to get your help with, because we have work to do to spread this information as we get closer to the 2026 elections. First off, again, you probably know a lot of this, but I want to make sure. Because of the service cuts that are happening at the Postal Service, we need everyone to update their plans to vote. Your ballots, even if they're just going across the county or across the city, are now going all the way to Portland for processing and postmarking. That means it could be the case that the post office has them for days before they get postmarked. And that is a critical thing in our system, because if it doesn't arrive at the elections office by election day, it has to have the postmark that is by election day. So the best way to make sure that your vote gets counted is to drop your ballot off in one of the secure county drop boxes before 8 o'clock on election night. If you want to use the mail, please do everything you can to make sure that you're getting it in the mail at least a week before election day. And if you need to use the mail and it's closer than a week, go into the post office, go up to the counter and ask the people there to put a hand postmark on it. We've been assured that they will do that, and that gives us the best chance of receiving it on time and having it count. Now, I also want you to watch the news from the U.S. Supreme Court. They are considering a case right now that might end that post-election grace period. If they rule against it, that means the ballots have to actually be received at the elections office by 8 o'clock on election night. And of course, we're going to do everything we can to update people on those decisions. Second, to make sure that you are clearly signing your ballot with the signature that you used to register to vote. I sometimes like to make a little fun of young people when I see them in restaurants or other places where they're using a credit card or a debit card and they sign their receipt. They just kind of do this. That's not going to cut it when it comes to elections, unless you did that with the exact same number of loops and ups and downs on your registration card. If you have a driver's license or a permit, there's a pro tip. You can look at what is on your driver's license. Did you use that middle initial or not? That can be your matching system. Because if your ballot isn't signed or if your signature doesn't match, it can't be counted. You will hear, of course, from the county clerk, and you have that opportunity to come in and cure your signature. But let's save everybody time and money and make sure that it gets counted from the start. So make sure that your signature is matching. We want every eligible Oregonian's vote to count. So help us do that quickly and efficiently, please. What I want to leave you with is this, and I really am looking forward to your questions. I think I've seen some people writing, so I don't have to talk here like I did at the high school about cold calling on people. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Democracy's never been easy. It never has been. And if it were, we would not have had to fight for it as we have over the course of this country's history. We wouldn't have marched for it. We wouldn't have amended our Constitution time and time again to bring more people into the promise of the country. Every generation inherits this fragile, remarkable thing, and every generation decides whether it's going to be strengthened or diminished on its watch. And I think this is our moment, because it's not that democracy is failing, it's being tested. I think it's being tested by fear, by cynicism, and by powerful interests that want to weaken faith in our institutions and in our obligation to follow the will of the people. But our democracy does not belong to the loudest voice or the wealthiest person or the most powerful office. It belongs to people who show up, who tell the truth, and refuse to give in to apathy and despair. That's all of you. So don't underestimate your power. Don't underestimate the impact of a conversation or a quiet act of courage. History is shaped by millions of everyday people deciding that democracy is worth that fight. So I hope we can all leave this room today committed to something very simple, but simultaneously very powerful: to participate. Let's recommit to passing on a stronger democracy than the one we inherited. That is how we make sure that the future of this country and this state is not decided by fear, but by the people. I really appreciate you all being here. I'm looking forward to your questions.